Chapter 62. Right up to the morning of the anniversary, Steve hadn't decided whether to go to the Grosvenor Square and join the crowd at the London Memorial or watch the live coverage from both London and then New York at home. He didn't have to be involved. Maybe he would just stay in a darkened room and sleep through it. Amy had asked him if he wanted her company, but if he was going to wake up and participate, he needed to experience it on his own. He cast an eye over the London ceremony, but after a hard week's work in Eastern Europe, he was barely awake. His late arrival home the previous evening came on the back of a Friday night session in Kiev which had dragged into Saturday morning before his flight home had been chronically delayed. Not for the first time, Steve reminded himself that he was too old for this shit. He'd been doing this stuff for 2 decades. It was a younger man's game. The build-up to the commemoration event dominated the news channels, even out in Ukraine. Every time he turned on the television, Steve was immediately immersed in the old footage which he could just not switch off. Everybody staggering away from the towers looked just like he had, and he scanned the footage looking at everybody in case he found any footage of Jared. Pause, rewind, repeat. There was nothing new. Every click of the remote darkened his already anguished mood. He stood when the moments of silence demanded it, and he sat to listen to the speeches, waiting for any name check Jared might get. But he never heard it. Footage reading all victims' names was not broadcast live. 5 hours of name reading was not something the networks could carry, but he would watch it online another day, extending further his decade of closure. In his deliberately darkened lounge, he watched in silence, offering a prayer for the lost and the thousands who had survived but never recovered. God wasn't part of his life, and he had no belief in anything spiritual. Despite reading that grief could stimulate a need for something bigger than we understand, he'd never fallen into the God trap, rationalizing that if God was so great, surely those planes would have suffered engine failure on the ground before they took off. Endless conspiracy theories dominated the internet. Tributes came from the great, the good, and the bereaved. And then there was George Bloody Bush. Steve had no interest in the lamentations of a man who chose a sensitive platform to justify his actions, linking the actions of the Flight 93 heroes with his own lie as war raging in the Middle East. Just as long as the odious Tony Blair was nowhere to be seen. Views of New York showed its people living their life 10 years on, while many struggled with the cards life had dealt them. The sun shone on the joggers and bikers who exercised across Central Park. Life seemed to be good for the walkers on the High Lines as they meandered down onto the pathway alongside the Hudson. Typically, predictably, he once again thought of Isla. Her name, her image, the woman who was never far away from his thoughts. His phone vibrated. It was a text from Amy. Are you okay? Love you, Dad. X. For the first time since he turned the television on hours before, Steve cracked a smile. This simple act of love triggered the emotion that needed to come out. As the tears flowed down his cheeks, he shook with the pain consuming him. But rather than message Amy back, he sent a text to somebody else. Hey mate, long time no speak. I still miss you. A familiar error message came back. Jared wouldn't be getting that text either. Nothing ever changed. He sat back with nothing but his thoughts for company. How and when would this tormented existence become something that didn't feel so desperate?